a chance encounter, a ruined photo shoot, a kiss that sets the internet on fire. In the glossy chaos of Lowe's Angels, a guarded film mogul and a fiercely independent filmmaker collide in a story the cameras were never meant to catch. But when fame, power, and raw emotion pull them into the spotlight, the real drama begins, off script. Who's writing the story now? And how much are they willing to risk to tell the truth? Subscribe to our channel and be the first to witness the love story Hollywood never saw coming. The morning sky over East Hollywood was the color of ash, tinted pink by the first hints of sun rising over the distant curve of the horizon. Laura Swift stepped out of her apartment with a small camera bag slung across her shoulder and a pair of headphones tangled around her wrist. The building she lived in had peeling turquoise paint, a rusted railing on the stairwell, and neighbors who exchanged nods instead of names. It suited her, quiet, half forgotten, clinging to a kind of beauty only she seemed to notice. She paused on the sidewalk and flipped through the pages of a worn leather-bound notebook, the kind with pages warped by old coffee spills and the occasional tear stain. Her handwriting, rushed but elegant, listed locations, fragments of dialogue she had overheard, names of strangers she wanted to find again. Corner store man with lazy eye talks like a poet. Elderly woman with dog that wears rain boots. Sound of train passing at sunset, use as transition. This was the language of her world now, scraps and moments, half-built stories waiting for light. Laura's current project, a self-funded documentary titled Humans of Nowhere, was a mosaic of real lives captured in real time. She filmed people others overlooked, an immigrant florist on the edge of eviction, a teenage muralist painting grief onto alleyway walls, a cashier who wrote haikus on the back of grocery receipts. No sponsors, no budget, just her and the city, endlessly unraveling. On her way to the laundromat where she planned to meet a retired jazz singer named Dolores, Laura stopped for a $5 iced coffee she could not afford. The barista, who knew her by now, gave her a sympathetic smile. She returned it with her usual quip, "Your tip jar funds my therapy," before slipping a quarter into it. Humor was her shield, wit her habit, neither had ever failed her in public. Privately, things were different. She still remembered the voicemail from her mother on the day of her graduation. "Sorry I missed it. I am sure you looked beautiful." There was no explanation, just silence behind the words. Her mother had been absent more often than not, physically present but emotionally vacant after Laura's father walked out with another woman when Laura was 13. Since then, Laura had built walls out of film stock and editing timelines. Control was safety. Story was survival. At the laundromat, the old bell above the door gave its usual metallic chirp as she entered. The air inside smelled like lavender and bleach. Dolores was there already, wearing a leopard print scarf and humming something low and bluesy under her breath. She was folding a mountain of pastel towels and did not look up. Laura lifted her camera. "Do you mind if I roll?" Dolores gave a faint shrug. "Long as you do not catch my wrinkles or my bad side." "You do not have a bad side," Laura said, positioning the lens as the hum of the dryer filled the room. "You look like someone who has lived." Dolores chuckled softly. "Honey, I have. That is why I do not trust mirrors anymore." The camera rolled as Dolores continued folding towels, her movements slow, deliberate. The scene was simple, just hands, motion, the rhythm of a task, but Laura saw beauty in that, a kind of truth too subtle for dialogue. As she watched the footage frame by frame through her viewfinder, Laura felt the usual ache stir in her chest. The ache of wanting something more, something permanent, even as her life moved in snapshots and shadows. She did not know exactly what that more looked like. She just knew she was not going to find it behind a desk at an ad agency or filming fake smiles for brands that paid in exposure. What she wanted was raw, honest, unfiltered. She wanted something, someone, that would not disappear when the camera stopped rolling. But love, like film, was fragile, and she had already lost too much light. Julian Vance arrived at the Paramount lot 15 minutes earlier than scheduled. as he always did, dressed in a navy suit tailored so precisely it moved like skin. His assistant trailed behind him, already scrolling through the day's agenda on a tablet, while a junior executive jogged across the parking lot clutching a caramel macchiato that was 2 degrees too warm. Julian would not drink it. He never drank anything with sugar before noon. The studio grounds pulsed with motion, golf carts zipping between sound stages, security radios chirping, extras filing out of wardrobe trailers in fake uniforms and plastic armor. But Julian walked through it all like he belonged to another world entirely. His steps were sharp, his gaze distant. People lowered their voices when he passed. Some smiled too broadly. Some said his name like a prayer. No one called him Jules. Inside his corner office on the 22nd floor, the windows stretched from floor to ceiling, offering an uninterrupted view of the Los Angeles skyline. He stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun climb over the hills. The desk behind him was immaculate, no clutter, no family photographs. Only a single paperweight, a glass cube containing an old reel of film, clipped and suspended like an insect in amber. Julian had built his empire on image. Not just the glossy kind that appeared in trailers and press releases, but the deeper kind. Reputation, precision, myth. His own myth had been crafted over years. The prodigy who sold his first screenplay at 19, the wunderkind who saved a failing studio in his early 30s, the man who could read a script in 10 pages and know if it was a hit. What the public did not know, and what he worked tirelessly to keep that way, was how fragile that myth had become. There had been a scandal once, a relationship that burned fast and publicly, with an actress whose name still echoed on gossip blogs. She had walked away from him mid-award season, citing irreconcilable ambition. The tabloids made her a martyr and him a villain. He had smiled through it all, bought her silence with a generous settlement, and never again let the world see behind the curtain. Now everything was calculated. The shoes he wore, the way he nodded in interviews. Even his absence from social media was strategic. Mystique was more powerful than 1,000 filtered selfies. He turned away from the window as his assistant spoke. Press wants a quote about the studio's diversity initiative. Marketing needs your sign-off on the Cannes campaign. And there's a photographer from Vogue setting up on the lot for that feature piece. Julian adjusted the cuff of his shirt. Remind me why I agreed to that. Public goodwill, humanizing the brand, your exact words. He gave a faint, humorless smile. Right human, how quaint. But behind the sarcasm, there was a flicker of weariness. A quiet, accumulating exhaustion from years of being the face of something too large, too demanding. His control had made him powerful, but it had also made him lonely in ways that no boardroom could fix. As he stepped out to prepare for the shoot, walking through the manicured lot that bore his name on half the marquees, he caught his own reflection in the glass wall of Studio 6. The man who looked back at him was flawless, expensive, composed, entirely curated, and completely unknown, even to himself. It was late morning when Laura set up her tripod at the edge of a pedestrian plaza near Grand Avenue, not far from where downtown Los Angeles pretended to be generous with its sunlight. The plaza was quiet, but alive in the way only city spaces could be, erratic rhythms of foot traffic, pigeons pecking at stale sandwich crusts, snippets of overheard conversations drifting by like loose-leaf pages. She had chosen the spot because of the light, the kind that filtered through the high-rise shadows and bounced gently off glass, giving everyone's skin a cinematic glow. Her subject was a skater, 16, maybe 17, doing slow turns and ollies over painted concrete, his earbuds dangling, half aware of her presence. The moment was unplanned and unscripted, just the kind of thing she loved. Laura pressed record. At first, she did not notice the equipment being unloaded at the far end of the plaza, white vans, lighting rigs, a canopy of assistants in headsets whispering into their collars. A production team moved with military precision, arranging props, brushing lint off garments, testing shadows. There was something uncomfortably sterile about it. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then the entourage arrived. Julian Vance stepped out of a black SUV wearing charcoal slacks and a dark open-collar shirt. His hair was set, his expression unreadable. The photographer, a wiry man in a linen scarf, fluttered toward him like a wind-blown crow. "Julian, darling, we are losing the mood. The light is running. Shall we shoot now?" Julian nodded once, already scanning the frame, calculating angles. At that precise moment, Laura moved into the shot. She was adjusting her lens, stepping backward without looking, focused entirely on the skater, who had just nailed a trick that sent his board flipping high into the air. Laura lunged instinctively to catch the landing, which meant she spun directly into the center of the meticulously framed Vogue cover shoot, tripod clattering, camera nearly tipping. Someone gasped. A production assistant shrieked, "Stop, stop, there's a—" The photographer lowered his camera with dramatic anguish. Julian's voice cut through, calm but razor-sharp. "Who is that?" Laura, blinking at the sudden invasion of light reflectors and crew members closing in around her, straightened slowly. Her t-shirt was 2 days old, her jeans were streaked with dust, and her hair was tied up with a pencil. "Oh, sorry," she said, brushing off her knees. "I thought this was still public space." Julian studied her for a long second. "It is, technically, but we have the permit." "Of course you do," she replied. "I should have known by the identical haircuts and the scent of imported arrogance." He raised an eyebrow. "Do you always insult strangers mid-shoot, or am I just special?" Laura grinned, unashamed. "Only the ones who take themselves too seriously." The production froze, waiting for Julian's reaction. He looked at her, really looked, as if cataloging the anomaly. She was unpolished, confident, and completely unaware of how out of place she was, and yet oddly unshaken. The photographer approached, panicked. "She ruined the light. We will have to reblock everything." "No," Julian said, still staring at her. "We are keeping the shot." "What but—" "She stays." He turned away, already walking, "and get a release form." Laura blinked, half amused, half confused. "A release form for what?" Julian glanced over his shoulder. "Congratulations. You are now the most authentic thing in the frame." Then he disappeared behind the monitors, leaving Laura in the middle of a set she had not known existed, surrounded by confused stylists and cameras worth more than her entire student loan debt. Somewhere above, a drone whirred into position, its red light blinking. Unbeknownst to either of them, the footage of that accidental encounter, Julian in crisp designer wear, Laura in a frayed denim jacket and combat boots, would be online by nightfall. And by morning, it would have millions of views. The photograph appeared online less than 4 hours after it was taken, cropped, filtered, and captioned with gleeful ambiguity. Julian Vance spotted getting cozy with unknown woman on set. A second image followed, then a third. In one, Julian was turning toward Laura, mid-sentence, his expression half impressed, half incredulous. In another, she was laughing, a flash of teeth and wind-blown hair, her camera strap twisted around her wrist like a badge of rebellion. The internet feasted. Celebrity blogs speculated immediately, who is she? A new starlet, a secret romance, a director muse. Twitter threads ballooned into conspiracy theories. Some claimed she was a disgraced heiress, others said she was an avant-garde filmmaker from Berlin. One viral post simply read, "I don't know who this woman is, but she just dethroned every red carpet regular in one flannel shirt." Laura found out the way everyone else did, through her phone. Her inbox had tripled in notifications by the time she made it home. The first text came from her old roommate, Grace. "Girl, what did you do? You're on TMZ." At first she thought it was a joke, then she clicked the link, and there she was, centered, framed, and utterly taken out of context. She dropped onto the couch, breath caught somewhere between a laugh and a groan. "Oh no," she muttered. "No, no, no, no." The knock on the door came just before dusk. 3 sharp raps. When she opened it, a man with a shaved head and sunglasses handed her an envelope without a word. "What is this?" she asked. He pointed to the gold-stamped seal, "Legal, from Vanguard Studios." Then he turned and walked off like a specter from a noir film. Inside the envelope was a standard appearance release, asking her to sign away usage rights to her image for the shoot she had interrupted, and any derivative media which may result from the footage thereof. Her phone buzzed again. "Would love to talk more about your work. Any rep. Assistant to Calvin R., HBO Dev Team." Then another. "Can you confirm your relationship with Julian Vance? Anonymous sources say you two have known each other for months." She tossed the phone onto the kitchen counter and paced the narrow space between her couch and the cluttered coffee table. The whole apartment felt too small now, too exposed. This was not what she had wanted, not at all. She filmed people who never asked to be seen, never asked for spotlights or headlines. Now she had become one, a walking question mark in someone else's narrative. She turned on her laptop, pulled up a blank document and stared at it for a long while. She typed one sentence, then deleted it. There was a strange irony in how fast the world had decided who she was, before she could say it for herself. Later that night, unable to sleep, she walked to the corner liquor store for a ginger ale and found a tabloid on the rack by the register. Her face was on the cover. The headline read, "Julian's Rebel, a love story in the making." She did not buy it. She barely looked at it. But as she left the store and headed into the night, she could still feel the heat of 1,000 invisible eyes, waiting to decide what role she was going to play next. Julian Vance hated surprises. Not in business, not in press cycles, and most certainly not when his name was trending on social media next to phrases like mystery woman and secret romance revealed. By mid-morning the next day, he had read at least a dozen conflicting articles about a moment he barely remembered. A split second in the middle of a botched shoot, caught on the wrong lens with the wrong person, and blown into a narrative he had no control over. That, more than anything, was what disturbed him, the loss of control. She was not even part of the production, he said, walking through the studio hallway with his assistant trailing behind him, tablet in hand. "She refused to sign the release," the assistant replied. "Apparently she has concerns about image exploitation and—" Julian stopped walking. "Of course she does. She is not represented, not union, no formal credits. Her name is Laura Swift, independent filmmaker, low following, mostly street documentary stuff." "She is a street director with an opinion about ethics," Julian muttered, jaw tight. "Perfect." An hour later, a black car pulled up to a converted duplex in East Hollywood. Julian stepped out, coat unbuttoned, expression unreadable. His shoes made no sound on the cracked concrete as he approached the front door and knocked once, sharp, deliberate. Laura opened it in a paint-stained shirt and leggings. Her hair was up in a messy twist, a pencil tucked through it like a pin. She blinked at him, startled, then narrowed her eyes. "Oh," she said, "it is you." "Charmed," he replied, voice flat. "May I come in?" She crossed her arms. "That depends. Are you here to sue me or offer me a modeling contract?" "Neither," he said. "I am here to discuss the consequences of uninvited fame." Laura gave a dry laugh. "That sounds like something a politician says before deleting their apology tweet." Julian stepped inside without waiting. The living room was small, cluttered with camera equipment, notebooks, and half-empty coffee mugs. It smelled like burnt toast and possibility. He glanced around, unimpressed. "This is where you build reputations?" he asked, nodding toward her editing setup. "This is where I build stories," she replied, shutting the door behind him. "Yours just happened to collide with mine." He turned to face her. "I am not interested in becoming someone else's accidental narrative." "Then you probably should not have walked into my frame," she said, tone casual but sharp. Their eyes met, silence stretched taut like wire. Julian adjusted his cufflink. This entire spectacle, the photos, the headlines, the conspiracy theories, is a distraction. I am asking you to step out of it. Sign the release, let the studio clear it up, and this goes away. Laura tilted her head, studying him. You mean you go back to controlling the story, and I go back to being invisible? His mouth tightened. No, I mean you go back to being irrelevant to the tabloids, unless, of course, you are enjoying the attention. For a moment, something flickered behind her eyes, hurt, maybe, but it vanished quickly. You know what, she said. You are exactly what I thought you would be, polished, prickly, and under the delusion that your time is worth more than anyone else. And you, he said, voice clipped, are a chaos artist with a martyr complex. Thank you, she said brightly. Now please get out of my apartment. He stood still for half a second, then turned and left without another word. The door clicked shut behind him. Laura exhaled slowly, as though she had been holding her breath the entire time. Then she walked over to her camera bag and pulled out a new roll of film. She was not sure what just happened, but whatever it was not over, not even close. 3 days passed without another word from Julian Vance. No follow-up messages, no lawyers, no smug remarks delivered in person. Laura told herself she was relieved. She told herself she had won. But that morning, while editing footage from her laundromat interview, she paused more than once. Not at Dolar's story, not at the audio glitch in the second reel. She paused every time she caught a glimpse of her own reflection on the screen, frozen in the edge of the frame, the same angle the tabloids had devoured. She was not used to being seen. The knock on the door this time was softer. She hesitated before answering. It was not Julian. It was a courier, holding a sleek black envelope with a studio crest embossed in gold. Inside was a formal proposal. Creative lead, Vanguard Studios' independent series campaign. Concept development and directorial vision requested, Laura Swift. Duration 3 weeks, paid, fully credited. Laura read the last part twice, fully credited, not anonymous, not background, not a ghost behind the camera. She sat down slowly, the paper trembling just slightly in her hand. Attached was a note, typed, unsigned, but she knew exactly who it was from. Your voice is messy, raw, authentic. I want to see what it can do under real pressure. That afternoon, against her better judgment, and because curiosity had always been her deepest vice, she found herself walking into a conference room at Vanguard Studios. The walls were glass, the chairs sculptural and sterile. A tray of untouched pastries sat in the corner like props. Julian was already seated at the head of the table, arms folded, eyes steady. You came, he said, as if it were a fact, not a surprise. I came to hear you out, Laura replied, not sitting. He gestured toward the seat opposite him. Consider this a creative collision. You said I live in fiction. Fine, let us make some together. She sat slowly. You want me to direct an ad? Not just an ad. A series of short visual pieces, impressionistic, minimal dialogue built around atmosphere and tone, for our indie imprint. We need the campaign to feel, not manufactured. And you thought of me, she asked, skeptical, because I humiliated you on camera. No, Julian said, because you embarrassed me in a way that did not feel artificial. Laura studied him. He was too calm, too composed, which only made her want to disrupt him again. What is the catch? She asked. You get full control of tone, packing, visual language, he said, but I approve the final cut. She arched an eyebrow. That is not full control. It is more than most people get, he replied. She leaned back in the chair, folding her arms. Why me? Because when I looked at that footage, Julian said, you were the only one in the frame who did not look like you were pretending. For a long moment, Laura said nothing. The hum of the ceiling lights filled the quiet between them. Then she reached across the table and picked up the treatment outline. Her fingers ran over the textured paper. 3 weeks. That was all. She could survive that. Maybe even do something with it. "All right," she said finally, "but I am not here to fix your image." Julian's mouth lifted, just barely. "No," he said, "you are here to show me mine." The first shoot took place in a decommissioned train station east of downtown, a place Laura had scouted weeks earlier for a completely different project, a documentary about urban silence. Now, under Vanguard's production budget, the station had been transformed overnight into something else entirely. A cavernous cathedral of rust and echoes, flooded with diffused light and carefully engineered shadow. Laura arrived early, camera already in hand. The concept for the first short crystallized in her mind like a quiet poem. A single actor wandering through forgotten spaces, touching remnants of the past, tickets, coins, broken clocks, each triggering a flood of memory told only through gesture and sound design. She was adjusting her lens when Julian walked onto set. "Lighting off on track 4, he said immediately, scanning the monitors. "It is flattening the midtones." Laura did not look up. "That is the point. I want it to feel forgotten, like history bleached out." "It looks incomplete," he replied. "It is incomplete," she shot back. "So is memory. I am not here to sell clarity." He stepped closer, folding his arms. "Then what are we selling?" She looked at him now, eyes steady. "Emotion, ambiguity, a reason to feel something without knowing why." Julian said nothing. For a moment, the air between them felt still, electrically charged, as though even the dust motes hovering in the sunbeams were waiting to see who would flinch first. Then he turned back to the lighting crew and made a quiet adjustment, not to override her, but to soften the shadows in a way that kept her intention intact while elevating the contrast. Laura watched him work. Begrudgingly, she admitted to herself, the man had an eye, just a very calibrated one. Over the next week, the friction between them became a rhythm. She fought for spontaneity. He fought for polish. She wanted handheld intimacy. He argued for precise Steadicam. She recorded ambient noise with an old field mic, letting wind and birdsong interrupt the scenes. He clipped her audio tracks and adjusted levels so the product would pass studio standards. "You are like someone trying to catch lightning in a bottle," Julian muttered once, watching her crouch beside a puddle to film the reflection of a passing stranger. "And you are like someone trying to bottle the lightning before it even strikes," she replied. But somewhere between the arguments and the edits, something began to shift. Not softening, exactly, more like recognition. Laura started to see how Julian carved shape out of chaos, how his discipline brought out clarity without stripping meaning. He, in turn, began to notice how her rawness pulled the camera into life itself, how she chased moments no storyboard could predict. During one late-night editing session, the two of them sat in a darkened suite, sound mixing a segment in near silence. The footage played. A woman in a long coat walking down a foggy bridge, no dialogue, just the rising echo of heels and a cello note that hung unresolved. "I did not expect this to hit me," Julian said quietly, almost to himself. Laura glanced at him but said nothing. She did not need to. The project was still messy, still a push and pull, but what had begun as mutual resistance was slowly becoming mutual regard. They did not agree, but they listened, and in that uneasy space between them, something new was being shaped, part friction, part trust. Neither of them named it yet, but it was there, and it was growing. The clock above the editing bay glowed a soft, persistent 2:15 a.m. The studio floor was dark except for the room where Laura and Julian sat hunched over a desk, surrounded by half-empty coffee cups, color correction monitors, and a quiet hum of fatigue. Outside the glass walls, Lowe's angels shimmered in silence, just traffic lights blinking at empty intersections and the occasional echo of a siren far below. They had been working for nearly 15 hours. The room smelled faintly of old espresso and ozone from the overworked machines. Laura sat barefoot, one leg tucked beneath her on the office chair, hoodie sleeves pulled past her knuckles. She was staring at the same frame she had watched 7 times, an actor pausing before opening a door, hesitation perfectly caught in the shift of his breath. "It is always that 1 second before they move," she murmured. "That is the part I care about, the moment no one sees coming." Julian leaned back on the couch across from her, jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled up. He looked less like the Julian Vance of press releases and more like someone halfway between armor and exhaustion. "That second," he said, "is also where most people fall apart." Laura glanced at him. He was not smiling. She closed her laptop slowly. "You speak from experience." There was a pause, not defensive, contemplative. "I was engaged," Julian said after a moment. "Years ago, she was an actress, rising star. We met at a casting session. Everything looked perfect on paper, in photos and interviews, until it didn't." Laura stayed quiet. He had never mentioned this before. The internet had, the tabloids had, but he had not. "She left me 2 weeks before the Oscars," he continued, voice low, "through a press statement. Said I was suffocating her career, that being with me made her invisible." Laura's fingers curled around the fabric of her sleeve. "That is brutal." Julian exhaled, not quite a laugh. It was efficient. Public pain becomes easier to ignore when the spotlight is already on. Silence fell again, not awkward, just raw. "I used to think," she said quietly, "that if I could just be good enough at telling other people's stories, I would stop feeling like mine was so incomplete." Julian looked at her now, and his face changed. Not softened, not exactly, but opened. "My dad left when I was 13, Laura went on. "He packed his things while I was at school and left a note in my mom's typewriter. She never recovered. She stopped seeing the point in finishing her own sentences, let alone listening to mine." Julian said nothing, he simply listened. "I think that is why I started filming things. Because at least with a camera I could rewind, freeze, prove that something real happened, that it meant something." She wiped the corner of her eye with the back of her hand, not quite crying but close. Julian, for once, did not offer a solution. No strategy, no polished response, just silence that held space for something unspoken. After a while he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I do not trust easily," he said. "Not because I am afraid of being seen, but because I know how often people only see what they want and leave the rest behind." Laura met his gaze, and in that instant something shifted. Not affection, not romance. Recognition. Two people in a glass box above a sleeping city, admitting that they were made of cracked glass themselves. Outside, the skyline pulsed softly. Inside, the room remained still, heavy with truth, and just light enough for something honest to begin. The forecast had promised sun, but by mid-afternoon, the sky broke open above the East Side warehouse district, turning gray concrete slick and gleaming. The production crew scrambled to cover equipment as rain fell in cold, heavy sheets, soaking the cables and warping the call sheet for the day's reshoot. Most of the crew took cover in the trailers. Only Laura stayed behind, crouched beneath the partial awning of a loading dock, shielding her camera with a worn plastic cover as she stared through the lens at the actor they had lost all morning to scheduling conflicts. The scene was simple: a man standing still in the rain, unmoving, refusing to run from it. What had seemed melodramatic on paper now felt strangely right in real life. Julian joined her without a word, no umbrella, his dress shirt already plastered to his skin. He looked down at the monitor and then back at the live frame. "You are still shooting?" he asked, voice just audible above the rain. Laura nodded. "It is better this way. Accidental rain always looks more honest than planned weather effects." Julian looked at her, bemused. "You are the only director I have worked with who celebrates the things we usually call disasters." That is because I do not pretend I can control everything, she said, brushing wet hair out of her eyes. Letting the world interfere is part of the point. The actor stepped off set. The assistant director called for a break. Now it was just the two of them, the rain and the echo of drops hammering down on the metal awning. Water ran in rivulets down the cracked pavement. Laura stood up and took a step into the rain without hesitation. Her hood fell back. Her sweater darkened instantly. Julian stared at her, then followed. "You realize this is completely irrational," he said, rainwater streaking across his forehead. "Irrational?" she asked, laughing. "You are the one wearing $2,000 shoes in a puddle." He looked down. "Damn it." She laughed harder, the kind that lifted her face and softened all the sharp lines around her mouth. It was the first time he had heard that kind of unguarded sound from her, the kind that made time feel irrelevant. "I forgot you could laugh like that," he said, a little quieter. "I forgot you could joke at all." Their eyes met. Neither moved at first. It was not choreographed, not planned, but something had been building between them for days, tension pulled tight and never named. And in that moment, soaked, laughing, a bit breathless, Julian stepped forward. He kissed her. It was not bold, not sweeping. It was hesitant at first, like he was asking a question with his mouth and waiting for her to answer. She did not pull away. Her hand rose to the back of his neck almost instinctively, grounding him, rainwater sliding between their fingers. When they broke apart, the silence was louder than before, but different. Laura blinked, still smiling faintly, not out of surprise, but out of something much softer. That was unexpected. Julian looked down at her, a rare flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "I know." She tilted her head, studying him with quiet wonder, but not unwelcome. The rain kept falling, indifferent to the moment it had just helped make, and for once neither of them rushed to define what came next. By morning, their kiss was everywhere. Someone on set, no one ever admitted who, had taken a photo. Grainy but unmistakable, Julian Vance standing in the rain, shirt clinging to him, lips brushing against a woman whose face was half obscured by wet hair and wonder. It had the kind of cinematic quality that required no caption, though the internet provided plenty anyway. Within hours, hashtags trended: Julian and Mystery Girl, Power Play or Passion. Laura woke to the sound of her phone vibrating off the edge of the nightstand. Her screen was lit up with messages, some from friends, some from unknown numbers, and one from her landlord asking if she had been involved in something scandalous, and if it would be on television. The first thing she saw online was her own face, then her name spelled wrong, then spelled right, then stripped of context entirely. She sat motionless on the edge of her bed, the blanket twisted around her ankles like a lifeline she had forgotten to hold onto. Articles popped up one after another, all under the same headline arc. Who is Laura Swift? Inside the life of Julian Vance's alleged new flame. They used stills from her student films as if they were selfies. They speculated about her past. They guessed at her age. One article highlighted a tweet she had written 3 years ago about capitalism and called her a fringe-minded activist with a chip on her shoulder. But the worst came hours later: comments. Anonymous users accusing her of seducing Julian to climb the Hollywood ladder. Threads dissecting her appearance. Someone posted an old photo of her in college with a joke caption too cruel to repeat. Then the threats began, quietly at first like static, then louder. "We see you now, sweetheart. Home-wrecking fraud. You think kissing a rich man makes you a star." She turned off her phone, then turned it back on, then off again. Her inbox filled with media inquiries. A few indie outlets wanted to hear her side. A podcast invited her for a raw, emotional conversation about fame and womanhood. She declined everything. At the studio, Julian's PR team scrambled. Official statements were drafted, denials considered, rehearsed. then abandoned. Julian himself had gone quiet. Laura did not know what hurt more, the silence or the noise. She walked through her neighborhood with a hoodie pulled tight over her face, trying to feel normal. But even the corner barista looked at her differently now. There was recognition in the eyes of strangers, but not empathy. Curiosity edged with judgment, like she had done something wrong simply by being visible. When she returned home that evening, a note had been slid under her door. "You're not alone in this, Jay." No signature, just those 5 words in slanted, unfamiliar handwriting. She sat on the floor and stared at the note for a long time. It should have been comforting, but all she could feel was the weight of being watched, reduced, rewritten. She had spent her life telling other people's stories. Now the world was telling hers, and none of it was true. The boardroom at Vanguard Studios was a cold, echoing space of polished glass and brushed steel. Floor to ceiling, windows gave a view of Lowe's Angels in its mid-morning haze, but no one was looking outside. All eyes were on Julian Vance. He stood at the head of the long obsidian table, hands clasped behind his back, his tailored suit immaculate despite the tension radiating from every corner of the room. The silence stretched just long enough to feel like punishment. Across from him sat the executive board, 8 men and women in suits of identical gray, eyes sharpened by years of quarterly reports and investor anxiety. At the far end was Everett Lang, chairman and founding partner, a man whose smile had not seen daylight since the early 2000s. "We will not dance around this, Julian," Lang said, folding his hands. "The optics are spiraling. The girl, the kiss, the photographs. It is starting to overshadow our upcoming slate. The investors are nervous. We are 2 months out from award season and this is the headline." Julian said nothing. "The narrative has shifted," added a woman near the center of the table. "What was once a campaign built on authenticity now reeks of opportunism. They are calling her a manufactured muse. And well, they are using words like unprofessional, manipulative, even predatory in some circles." "She is not part of the campaign anymore," Julian said evenly. "The project was finished days ago." "Does not matter," Lang snapped. "Her name is linked to yours now. Your image is the brand. If it tarnishes, everything follows." Another board member spoke, measured but firm. "We are advising you to take a step back from public engagement. No appearances, no press, no casual outings, especially not with her. Let it fade, or—" Julian raised an eyebrow. "Or—" A long pause. Lang leaned forward. "Or we begin restructuring. Quietly. We would prefer not to, but this studio cannot afford another headline scandal from its CEO, especially when we are courting international markets." The threat landed with surgical precision. Julian did not flinch, but the room caught the brief flicker in his eyes, a rare slip behind the armor. "I have spent years building this company's legacy," he said finally, "and I have done so by trusting instinct over consensus. That instinct brought us 3 box office records, 5 festival wins, and a media platform expansion you all once called impossible." Lang gave a thin smile. "We are not questioning your track record, Julian. We are questioning your judgment now." Julian stood in the stillness that followed, the only sound the faint hum of the air vents. He could feel the calculus unfolding in his head, reputation versus truth, image versus impulse. All his life he had chosen control. But this time the line between his public and private selves had blurred, and part of him wondered if it was because, for once, he had allowed something real to slip through. "Understood," he said coolly. "I will handle it." He left the room with every step measured, every breath steady. But inside, the storm had already begun. Because what they did not understand, what they never could, was that this time, handling it might mean not walking away. It might mean standing still and fighting back. The studio's courtyard was all manicured hedges and white stone, designed for controlled elegance, for press photos and executives who never broke a sweat. Laura walked through it with her backpack slung low over one shoulder, damp from the storm the night before. Her boots made no sound against the path, but in her head, everything was noise. She had not returned Julian's messages, not the texts, not the voicemail he left at 2 in the morning, his voice sounding more tired than distant. She had replayed it once, maybe twice, then deleted it. Her name was still trending online. She stepped into the lobby of the production wing, ignoring the receptionist's startled expression. Eyes followed her, interns, assistants, people who had once smiled and complimented her vision. Now they stared like she was a live wire that might spark. Julian was not in his office. She knew before she opened the door. His jacket was missing from the coat rack. The espresso on the side table had gone cold. On his desk was a printed draft of the campaign credits, freshly edited, her name bold beneath director. But she did not feel proud. She felt erased, condensed into a role she had never agreed to play, the woman behind the man, the footnote to a narrative she never authored. She sat down in the chair across from his, letting the silence settle like dust. By the time he returned, the light had changed. "Laura," he said, startled, then recovering. "I was on a call. I am done," she said simply. He froze, reading something final in her tone. "If this is about the press." "It is not about the press," she said. "Or at least not just the press. It is about the fact that I do not belong in this world, not the way you do. I tell stories from the margins, Julian. I do not survive under a spotlight I cannot control." He moved toward her. "You are not a headline, you are not a scandal." "No," she said, "but I have been made into one, and the longer I stay near you, the more I become what they say I am." He exhaled slowly. "I did not ask for any of this either." "I know," she said, "but you know how to live in it. You were born in it, shaped by it. You can put on the armor and smile for the cameras. I cannot. I do not want to." There was a beat of silence. "So that is it?" he asked, his voice softer now. "You are just walking away." "I am not walking away," she replied. "I am choosing myself. I am choosing the version of me that existed before the world tried to write me into your script." She reached into her bag and placed her director's badge on his desk, then stood. He looked at her like he wanted to say more, to pull her back with something honest or noble or desperate. But all the words seemed to catch in his throat. When she left the office, she did not look back, not at the portraits of past executives, not at the skyline beyond the glass, not even at him. Outside, the sky had cleared. The rain was gone, but the air still held the weight of it. Laura walked into that clarity, not running, not hiding, but carrying her truth forward, quiet and steady. Because sometimes, walking away was the only way to reclaim the story. The boardroom was quiet again, but this time not because of tension, it was resignation. Julian stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, as a marketing executive clicked through slides of underperforming numbers. A series of new ads, polished, sleek, calculated, had just launched for Vanguard's latest indie division. They had the budget, they had the faces, they had the reach. But they had no soul. "Engagement is down 17%, the executive said, his voice carefully neutral. "The last 3 segments underdelivered in both retention and emotional response metrics." Another chimed in, almost apologetically. "We had expected more after the Swift campaign." No one said it out loud, but it hung in the air anyway, since she left. Julian did not flinch, but inside something was unraveling, slowly, quietly, the way something falls apart when it has been hollow too long. Later in his office, he watched the unreleased cuts from the last campaign she had directed. He sat alone in the dark, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The screen lit his face with flickers of shadow and motion, faces caught mid-thought, hands brushing past each other in silence, frames that pulsed with feeling rather than message. Laura had not staged these moments. She had waited for them, coaxed them gently, captured them without fear of imperfection. She had made the quiet loud, and without her everything felt hollow. He thought he had hired her for her unpredictability, for the way she disrupted his structure, for the challenge. But what lingered now was not her style, it was her presence. Her laugh under the rain, the defiance in her eyes, the calm in her silences. She had asked him once what he was afraid of. He had not answered. Now he knew. He was afraid of not being seen, truly seen, and of what it meant that she had. That she had peeled him open with a glance, found something unpolished and did not run. And he had let her go. Julian leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning under the weight of someone finally still. He stared at the city through the glass, the same skyline he had stared at for years, and realized it had never looked lonelier. He was not just missing her creativity. He was missing her, all of her. It was not strategy, it was not partnership, it was not even guilt. It was love. Unspoken, inconvenient, late. But real. The editing room Laura borrowed was cramped and sunless, a converted garage in Echo Park that smelled faintly of solder and burnt coffee. The walls were lined with foam panels someone had stapled on by hand, and the ceiling fan ticked faintly, like an old clock running out of time. But for the first time in months, Laura felt awake. She had stopped checking her phone weeks ago, stopped reading headlines, stopped chasing validation. All she did was work, 10, 12, sometimes 14 hours a day, pulling late nights and early mornings to finish Humans of Nowhere, the documentary she had abandoned during the chaos. Only now it was not just about city streets and quiet strangers. She had folded herself into it, not overtly, not indulgently, but she had let herself be seen. Her camera had always pointed outward, but now it had finally turned inward just enough. A cracked voiceover, a lingering shot of her empty apartment, a scene of her walking, face just out of focus, hands jammed in her pockets, breath visible in the cold. The film did not resolve. It did not offer answers. It pulsed with discomfort and truth. And it was real. She submitted it to 4 festivals, not because she believed it would get in, but because some part of her had to try. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived in the mail, thick, official, bearing the seal of the Los Angeles Independent Film Assembly. She tore it open with ink-stained fingers, breath shallow. We are thrilled to inform you that your film, Humans of Nowhere, has been officially selected for the main showcase. She read the sentence again and again. The premiere was held in a retrofitted theater near Highland Park. Red velvet curtains, flickering marquee, folding chairs that creaked when people leaned forward in anticipation. Her name, Laura Swift, was printed on the program, small but undeniable. She sat in the back row, heart hammering. When the lights dimmed, silence swept through the room, and then the screen came alive. 91 minutes later, the credits rolled over the sound of rain. No one moved. Then a single pair of hands clapped, then another. Then the room erupted into applause, not thunderous, not theatrical, but deep, respectful, moved. Afterward, strangers approached her with teary eyes. A professor offered to screen the film for his students. An agent handed her a card. A woman whispered, "Thank you. You filmed something I thought no one noticed." Laura smiled, overwhelmed and quiet. Outside, on the sidewalk under the soft buzz of the theater's sign, she looked up at the night sky and felt the surreal weight of being seen, on her own terms, in her own voice. She had not won an award, but she had made something that mattered. And for the first time, she no longer felt like a footnote. The email came from an address Laura did not recognize, buried in a folder she rarely checked, sandwiched between spam and an unsolicited offer to sell her documentary as an NFT. The subject line was blunt, "Coffee, I have a proposition." The sender's name made her pause. Miles Thatcher. She knew the name, of course, everyone in the film world did. Once Julian's most aggressive competitor, Thatcher had built his reputation not through polish but through provocation. His films were visceral, loud, politically unapologetic. Where Julian was all control and elegance, Miles was chaos and confrontation. The two had famously clashed over funding battles, festival lineups, and even casting wars. The industry loved to pit them against each other. So why was he reaching out to her? Curious, she agreed to meet. They chose a coffee bar in Lowe's Fellas, the kind with mismatched chairs and hand-poured everything. Laura arrived early, half expecting him to cancel. But at exactly 11 o'clock a.m., Miles Thatcher strolled in wearing a wool coat over a t-shirt that read, "Make it ugly, but make it true." He ordered a black coffee, no sugar, then sat across from her like they were old collaborators. "I saw your film," he said without preamble. "Humans of Nowhere." It hit like a punch I did not see coming. Laura raised an eyebrow. "Thank you, I think." Miles smiled. "You made something that did not beg to be liked. It just demanded to be felt. That is rare." She folded her arms, cautious. "So why reach out? I'm not exactly a safe investment these days." "That is precisely why," he said. "I like filmmakers who scare executives, people who get under the skin of the machine and don't apologize for it." He sipped his coffee, then leaned in slightly. "I am producing a slate of experimental shorts next quarter. Unfiltered work. Real vision. No studio notes. You would have full control, budget, cast, crew. I want your voice on it." Laura blinked. "You are offering me a directing job." "I am offering you independence," Miles corrected, "and a little revenge. Let us be honest, Vanguard never deserved you." She studied him, trying to decipher the angle. But there was no malice in his tone, only a sharp, restless kind of admiration, the kind that recognized its own kind. "Why do this?" she asked finally. Miles shrugged. "Julian always knew how to play the long game, but you made him bleed a little. I respect that. Also, I like betting on talent before the world catches up." Laura smiled, slow and careful. It was unexpected, it was strange, but it was real. And for the first time since walking away from the studio, she felt something not unlike momentum. A door had opened, one she had not knocked on, and behind it something new waited. She reached across the table and shook his hand. "All right," she said, "let us make something dangerous." The theater was dimly lit, its vintage sconces flickering softly as guests murmured and found their seats. Rows of folding chairs creaked under the weight of anticipation. A modest red carpet had been rolled out over the cracked pavement outside, not for spectacle, but for ceremony, for respect. Inside, near the back wall beneath the humming projection booth, a man in a dark hoodie and low baseball cap slid quietly into an aisle seat. He kept his head down, his posture deliberately unremarkable. No security, no entourage, just him. Julian Vance did not belong in rooms like this, rooms that smelled like dust and ambition, that breathed with nervous energy instead of polish. But he was here, not to be seen, not even to make amends. He was here to see her. The lights dimmed, a hush fell, the screen flickered, and Humans of Nowhere began to unfold. It opened with silence, just the soft rustling of wind across a chain-link fence and a wide shot of a woman staring through a laundromat window. No title card, no narration, only presence. Julian felt the tension in his own body begin to dissolve, piece by piece, as the film pulled him inward. Laura's fingerprints were everywhere. He recognized her rhythm in the edits, the patience in the camera's stillness, the way she let people speak and breathe without interruption. She had always said she was not trying to tell stories, just to let them exist. And here they were, luminous in their ordinariness. An elderly man describing the silence of grief, a teenager sketching wings over cracked sidewalks, a waitress dancing alone after her shift. But what caught him off guard was how often he appeared, never literally but in shadow, in metaphor. There was a scene of rain falling on empty pavement, a hand lingering on the edge of a cafe table, A fleeting moment where a character stood beneath a billboard bearing Julian's face, then turned away, eyes unreadable. Subtle nods, honest ones, not cruel, not romanticized. Just real. By the time the credits rolled, Julian's jaw was tight and his chest felt impossibly full. He remained seated as people applauded, as Laura was called to the front with quiet reverence, as flashes from press cameras lit her face like she had always belonged there. She wore black, minimal makeup, hair pinned loosely, but her presence filled the room. She looked calm, grounded, free. Julian watched her from the shadows, not with longing but with something more fragile, admiration, maybe even awe. She had not just survived the storm. She had crafted something from it, something lasting. He did not approach her, did not linger. When the lights came up and the applause died down, he slipped out the side door, back into the Lowe's Angels night, unnoticed. But as he walked away, he carried the sound of her voice, faint in the film's final scene, a monologue not credited to any character, spoken over the image of a city waking up. Some things are not meant to be defined, they are meant to be witnessed. He had always tried to define her. Now finally he understood. She was meant to be witnessed. The after-party was tucked into the corner of a rooftop bar in Silver Lake, where string lights tangled above the crowd and old jazz played from a half-decent speaker system. It was modest by industry standards. No velvet ropes, no champagne towers, just filmmakers in borrowed jackets, festival volunteers nursing well drinks, and a handful of critics who knew how to keep their notebooks tucked discreetly in their pockets. Laura stood near the railing, a glass of ginger ale sweating in her hand, eyes drifting out over the hazy sprawl of Lowe's Angels. The city looked quiet from up here, manageable. She had just come off a wave of handshakes and congratulations, the kind of praise that felt real, not rehearsed. And yet she still felt on edge, like something unfinished was trailing behind her, waiting to be confronted. She heard his voice before she turned. "I almost did not come," Julian said quietly. She turned slowly. He stood a few feet away, no longer in a hoodie but not in his usual armor either. No tailored suit, no stylist-approved perfection, just a dark shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hands in his pockets. "I saw you," she said, her voice even, "at the screening." Julian nodded. "I did not want to be seen. I just needed to see you, see what you made." Laura stared at him, unsure if the ache in her chest was anger or nostalgia. "You could have reached out." "I did," he said, "a dozen times, but you were right to ignore me." She looked away, sipping her drink. "So what changed?" He stepped closer, carefully, as though aware that the ground between them might still crack. "I did," he said, "eventually." She met his gaze, searching. "Why are you here, Julian?" He did not rush the answer. "Because I owe you more than silence. I owe you the truth." His voice softened. "I was afraid, not of the scandal, not of losing my position. That was easy. I was afraid of needing someone who saw me without the polish, someone who might actually know who I am and love me anyway." Laura's jaw tightened, but she did not speak. He continued, eyes steady. "When you walked away, I told myself it was professional, that I was protecting you. But it was me I was protecting, from vulnerability, from change, from admitting that I loved you and that I did not know how to be loved back." That word, loved, hung between them like a glass still catching light. He took a slow breath. "So this is not me asking you to forgive me. This is me saying I understand, and that I am sorry, not for how I felt, but for what I did with that feeling." Laura looked at him for a long, silent moment. She did not cry. She did not flinch. But something in her shifted, the way a closed door might give slightly under a familiar knock. "And what do you want from me now?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "Nothing, except to say it out loud and let you decide what comes next." Behind them, laughter rose from the bar. Glasses clinked. A guitar began to strum from the far corner. Laura turned back to the city skyline, her profile sharp against the blur of downtown lights. Then she looked at him again, really looked. "Sit down," she said, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. Julian blinked. "What?" "I am not ready for the next thing," she said, "but I am willing to finish this conversation." He sat. Not as a CEO, not as a man trying to win something back, just as someone who had finally learned how to show up. Beside her, in the quiet above the city, that was enough. The press conference was held in a modest auditorium inside the Vanguard Studios campus, a space usually reserved for investor briefings and internal screenings. But this time, it was packed with journalists, critics, and camera crews, all expecting damage control, something sharp, rehearsed, and sterilized. Julian Vance stood alone at the podium. No entourage, no teleprompter, no digital slideshow behind him, just a glass of water at his side untouched. He wore a simple blazer over a black shirt, no tie. His expression was calm, clear, and for the first time in months unmasked. He scanned the room, then leaned forward into the microphone. "I am not here to explain away a headline," he began, his voice steady. "And I am not here to spin a narrative that suits my career or salvages a brand. I am here to say something I should have said a long time ago, publicly." He paused, letting the silence settle. "There has been a great deal of speculation about my relationship with Laura Swift, who she is, what she meant to me, what her role was in our recent campaign, and most of that conversation has ignored the truth, that she is one of the most original, uncompromising voices working in film today." Cameras clicked, eyebrows raised, but Julian did not flinch. "I brought her into this studio under the guise of collaboration, but in truth, it was her vision that carried that campaign. I fought it at first. I resisted her methods, her instincts, her refusal to compromise, and I was wrong." He looked out over the crowd, making no effort to appear polished or charming, only honest. "The industry has a habit of controlling women who challenge convention. We call them difficult. We question their motives. We reduce their work to a footnote in someone else's success. I have benefited from that system, and I regret that deeply." There was a murmur in the room, low, uncertain, but Julian did not slow. Humans of Nowhere is not a breakout film. It is a masterwork. It did not happen because the system nurtured it, but in spite of that system. Laura Swift did not need my name, my money, or my protection. All she needed was space. And we, this industry, we need to start giving more space to people like her. He stepped back slightly from the microphone. His voice softened, but his conviction did not. "I am not making this statement to redeem myself. I am making it to make room for better stories, for bolder voices, and for the truth that creativity cannot survive under fear." There were no applause cues, no orchestrated ovation, but after a breathless pause, someone clapped, then another, and slowly the room began to rise, not in reverence to Julian, but in acknowledgement of the moment, of what it meant for someone in his position to choose humility over defense, clarity over spin. Julian stepped off the stage quietly, bypassing the flashing bulbs and outstretched microphones. He did not stay to answer questions, because the statement was not about him. It never had been. They met again in the quiet hours of a Thursday morning, inside a sunlit cafe tucked into a quiet block of Lowe's Fellas. There were no cameras this time, no scripts, no headlines to chase, just a corner table near the window, the scent of strong coffee, and two people who had stopped pretending they were anyone but themselves. Laura arrived first, notebook in hand, pages dog-eared and frayed at the edges. Her hair was pinned up in that half-careless way he had come to recognize as her version of focus. When Julian walked in, she looked up without smiling, but her eyes were softer than before. "Thought you might be late," she said. "I never am," he replied, setting his coffee down, easing into the seat across from her. "But I did hesitate outside for a full 3 minutes." She raised an eyebrow, second thoughts. No, he said. Just wanted to be sure I was walking in as the right version of myself this time. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. Well, she said after a moment, you are off to a better start already. They sat for a while talking first about nothing, then about film. She described the concept for her next project, not a sequel to Humans of Nowhere, but something stranger, more intimate. A film told in vignettes, tracing invisible connections between people in a fractured city. It was ambitious, vulnerable. She was not sure it would work. Julian listened, not as an executive, not as a critic, but as someone who had finally learned how to trust a story he did not control. I want you involved, she said, eyes on her notes. But as a partner, not a shadow, not a fixer. You produce, I direct. You trust me, I push you. No shields, no spin. He nodded slowly, agreed, and no edits without your final sign-off. That too, she said, lips curving slightly. Julian reached into his coat pocket and slid a small object across the table, a flash drive. No label, just a metal casing and a faint scratch on the side. What is this? She asked. A grant, he said, private funding, unattached to any studio. It is yours to manage, total discretion. It comes with no press releases, no strings. Laura picked it up, turned it over in her hand. She looked at him, uncertain for a heartbeat. Are you sure you know how to let go of the wheel? She asked. He gave the barest smile. Not completely, but I am learning to be a passenger. They left the cafe together, walking without urgency through a street that smelled of jasmine and sun-warmed concrete. No one followed them. No one stared. They were just two people, side by side, moving forward. Not perfectly, not with guarantees. But finally together, on equal ground. The rooftop was quiet now, long after the applause had faded and the stage lights had dimmed. A few scattered lanterns flickered along the edges, casting soft gold halos onto the worn concrete. Below, downtown Los Angeles glowed like a restless constellation, headlights threading the veins of midnight boulevards, neon signs humming their constant lullaby. Laura stood near the railing, barefoot, heels abandoned by a folding chair somewhere behind her. In her hands was the award, a polished glass sculpture shaped like an open frame. She held it loosely, like it was something she never thought she would be asked to carry. The ceremony had ended an hour ago. Her name had been called, her speech delivered, halting, unvarnished, sincere. She had thanked no one she did not mean to thank. She had not mentioned Julian by name. She did not have to. He appeared beside her now, quietly, like he had always known how to find her when the noise was over. I think we can agree, he said. You have officially stolen the third act. Laura smirked, not taking her eyes off the skyline. Stolen implies it was yours to begin with. Julian laughed, hands in his pockets. The wind brushed past them, cool and dry, lifting a strand of her hair across her cheek. Without thinking, he reached over and tucked it behind her ear. She let him. There was no crowd here, no lenses, just breath and space and the rhythm of a city that had finally let them be still. She looked down at the award, then up at him. Do you remember what you said the first day I stepped into your office? He pretended to think. Something deeply arrogant, I imagine. You said you wanted to see what I could do under pressure. He tilted his head. And you called me a sterile perfectionist who thinks emotion is a liability. I did, she said, still true on occasion. Well, Julian said, turning toward her fully, his voice quieter now, if this is what pressure produces, I would like to see what happens when you are happy. Laura smiled at that, really smiled, the kind that reached all the way through her. Julian took a slow step forward. So, now that you have won something, told your story, terrified the industry and made me irrelevant, I only have one question left. He paused, then asked it with a lopsided grin that only barely masked how much he meant it. Will you direct the rest of my life? Laura laughed, unapologetic, joyful, surprised by her own answer even as it formed. Yes, she said, but only if you agree to improvise. His hand found hers. She squeezed back. Below them the city kept moving, but for once they did not have to. The credits, if there were any, would roll slow, over the hum of Lowe's angels, over two silhouettes against a rooftop sky, no longer running, no longer pretending. Just beginning.